Hi everyone. Sorry I can't be in class today because we have meetings for the teachers today. So you are going to do your work with me on a YouTube video. So let's just get started and take a look at our goals for the day. So last class we read chapter 7 and you did chapter 8 for homework, where we learned more about Salva's experience on the Nile. So I'm excited to read your annotations about that. Today, we're going to be reading chapters 9 and 10. Those are your pages to stop and annotate at if you would like a suggestion. You may always annotate on your own page if you find something striking. And the thing we're thinking about and annotating about today is what obstacles do our characters face? And so let's start by talking about, well, what is an obstacle? An obstacle is just a fancy word for a challenge or something that makes moving forward harder. So you may have seen one of these like blow up obstacle courses. That's like a fun obstacle, right? You're going through it and trying to get around the different barriers. Well, obstacles can be lots of different things. So, for example, if your internet crashes, that's an obstacle for you because you can't get onto the Zoom for school. And so let's take a look at some of the obstacles that Salva has faced so far in our book, A Long Walk to Water. So here are some of the big obstacles that Salva has faced. Salva didn't have any food. His friend Mariel was eaten by a lion. Salva can't find his parents. Salva was attacked by mosquitoes all night. Remember, that just happened with the Nile. And then Salva had to run from the school in the very beginning when the soldiers came to his school, right? To his village. So these are a bunch of obstacles that Salva has faced in our story. What I'd like you to do right now is I'd like you to look at each one and think about, what do you think is the most challenging obstacle Salva has faced so far? And if you think there's one I didn't include, you can include that in your answer. But go ahead and take a moment and answer the question on Edpuzzle. Which obstacle do you think is the most challenging for Salva so far, and why? Go ahead and pause the video. So you should have chosen and talked about which obstacle was the most challenging. Well, today while we're reading, we're going to keep thinking about that. So I'd like you to go ahead and pull up your annotation document and your chapter 9 reading. We're going to read chapter 9 together. And while we're reading, we're going to think about what obstacles Naya and Salva face. So go ahead and pull up your annotation document now and scroll down to chapter 9 and 10. You can pause the video to get your document open now. All right, so let's go ahead and read chapter 9. Chapter 9, Southern Sudan, 2008. So we're reading Naya's portion. Let me just move this over a little so my video doesn't get in the way. Awesome. Naya's family has been back in the village for several months. The day the visitors came, in fact, it was nearly time to leave for the camp again. As the jeep drove, most of the children ran to meet it. Shy about meeting strangers, Naya hung back. Two men emerged from the jeep. They spoke to the biggest boys, including Naya's brother, Depp, who led them to the home of the village's chief, his and Naya's uncle. The chief came out of his house to greet the visitors. They sat in the shade of the house with some of the other village men and drank tea together and talked for a while. What are they talking about? Naya asked Depp. Something about water, Depp replied. Water? The nearest water was the pond, of course, half a morning's walk away. Anyone could have told them that. So you see, Naya's a little bit confused about why these men are coming to talk about water when she knows everything about water, of course, because she does that every day. All right, let's transition to Salva. Let me just make my window a little smaller so I can get the toolbar. Southern Sudan, 1985. Salva had never seen anything like the desert. Around his village, Lunarik, enough grass and shrubs grew to feed the grazing cattle. There were even trees, but here in the desert, nothing green could survive except tiny, evergreen acai bushes, which somehow endured the long winter months with almost no water. So, guys, I'm noticing that we're in a new setting. We've now left the Nile and we're in something almost the opposite, the desert. Uncle said it would take 3 days to cross the Akobo. Salva's shoes stood no chance against the hot, stony desert ground. The soles made from rubber tire treads had already been reduced to shreds, held together with a little leather and a great deal of hope. After only a few minutes, Salva had to kick off the flapping shreds and continue barefoot. The first day in the desert felt like the longest day Salva had ever lived through. The sun was relentless and eternal. There was neither wisp of cloud nor whiff of breeze for relief. Each minute of walking in that arid heat felt like an hour. Even breathing became an effort. Every breath Salva took seemed to drain strength rather than restore it. Thorns gored his feet. His lips became cracked and parched. Uncle cautioned him to make the water in his gourd last as long as possible. It was the hardest thing Salva had ever done, taking only tiny sips when his body cried out for huge gulps of thirst-quenching, life-giving water. Wow, I think I might pause and annotate. You can pause the video and annotate now. I think we've met a new obstacle for Salva. This seems like a very huge challenge. See if you can use some details from the text in your annotation. Let's continue on. The worst moment of the day happened near the end. Salva stubbed his bare toe on a rock and his whole toenail came off. The pain was terrible. Salva tried to bite his lip, but the awfulness of that never-ending day was too much for him. He lowered his head and the tears began to flow. Soon he was crying so hard that he could hardly get his breath. He could not think. He could barely see. He had to slow down, and for the first time on the long journey, he began to lag behind the group. Stumbling about blindly, he had not noticed the group drawing farther and farther ahead of him. As if by magic, Uncle was suddenly at his side. "Salva Mawin du Arik," he said, using Salva's full name loud and clear. Salva lifted his head, the sobs interrupted by surprise. "Do you see that group of bushes?" Uncle said, pointing. "You need only to walk as far as those bushes. Can you do that, Salva Mawin du Arik?" Salva wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. He could see the bushes. They did not look too far away. Uncle reached into his bag. He took out a tamarind and handed it to Salva. Chewing on that sour, juicy fruit made Salva feel a little better. When they reached the bushes, Uncle pointed out a clump of rocks up ahead and told Salva to walk as far as the rocks. After that, a lone acai, another clump of rocks, a spot of bare everything except sand. Uncle continued in this way for the rest of the walk. Each time, he spoke to Salva using his full name. Each time, Salva would think of his family and his village, and he was somehow able to keep his wounded feet moving forward one painful step at a time. At last, the sun was reluctantly forced from the sky. A blessing of darkness fell across the desert, and it was time to rest. My friends, you might want to pause the video and annotate now about this obstacle and how Uncle helped Salva get through this obstacle of the desert. The next day was a precise copy of the one before. The sun and the heat, and the worst of all, to Salva's mind, a landscape that was utterly unchanged. The same rocks, the same acais, the same dust. There was not a thing to indicate that the group was making any progress at all across the desert. Salva felt as if he had walked for hours while staying in exactly the same place. The fierce heat sent up shimmering waves that made everything look wobbly. Or was he the one who was wobbling? That large clump of rocks up ahead, it almost seemed to be moving. It was moving. It was not rocks at all. It was people. Salva drew nearer. Salva counted 9 men. All of them collapsed on the sand. One made a small, desperate motion with his hand. Another tried to raise his head but fell back again. None of them made a sound. As Salva watched, he realized that 5 of the men were completely motionless. One of the women in Salva's group pushed forward and knelt down. She opened her container of water. "What are you doing?" a man called. "You cannot save them." The woman did not answer. When she looked up, Salva could see tears in her eyes. She shook her head, then poured a little water onto a cloth and began to wet the lips of one of the men on the sand. Salva looked at the hollow eyes and the cracked lips of the men lying on the hot sand, and his own mouth felt so dry that he nearly choked when he tried to swallow. "If you give them your water, you will not have enough for yourself." The same voice shouted, "It is useless. They will die, and you will die with them." My friends, that's the end of chapter 9. Please go ahead and annotate about this moment. And then you can please listen to the audiobook or read chapter 10 on your own and make 2 annotations while you're reading chapter 10 for your homework. Thank you for participating.